traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Forever Remodeling. Stress-free and high-quality remodeling. View their stunning transformations online at the number 4everremodeling.com.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. I want to go back to an assessment that Matt Taibbi, Racket News is his outlet, an assessment he offered on the intelligence assessment on Megyn Kelly's podcast yesterday after the second tranche of documents was dumped by one director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Here's Taibbi on the meaning of the new information contained in the documents that were released yesterday, for which Tulsi Gabbard held a White House briefing.
Yeah, and that's really the striking set of documents is you can see on December 9th, there is an order from the Director of National Intelligence Office basically giving out directions on how to put together a new intelligence community assessment per the president's request. But as they're giving out the assignment, the homework is already published in the New York Times and the Washington Post. In other words, they hadn't even started work yet, or group work, on this assessment, and they were already telling everybody in the media what the conclusion was. So the entire work period of this had to be a sham. Essentially, they pre-concluded what was going to be in the assessment and started leaking in advance.
So just political skullduggery, political crimes against the Republic by Team Obama, or some federal crimes included with those political crimes? For an answer to that question, we're pleased to be joined by Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney, Southern District of Manhattan, contributing editor at National Review, and author of the bestseller Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Dan.
So let's dive right in. The questions surrounding the criminal referral, which Tulsi Gabbard said, yes, includes the former president, Obama, that is. Do we have a basis for a criminal investigation into all parties that were at that December 9th meeting based on what we know about this 180 with the intelligence assessment and how it was used?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I would think that if you had a criminal referral, one of the things they would have discussed was a crime, like a crime that would be prosecutable today. They've thrown the word treason around, which is, that's just demagogic, because treason obviously doesn't apply to this situation. Treason is levying war against the United States or lending aid and comfort to wartime enemies of the United States. So that, that doesn't even, it's not even in the same zip code. And what I've always maintained about this, I don't think any of these revelations are new. I think it's papering what we already knew. I wrote a book about this 8 years ago that laid out Obama's role in it. And I believe then, and I believe now, that this was the worst political dirty trick in American history. And the reason it was effective was that it used as a pretext to spy on Trump and his campaign, then his administration, in order, in a very political way, to try to, detract from his effectiveness. But the pretext for that was something that was a legitimate investigation and legitimate for the government to do, which is the investigation of Russia's meddling in the election. There's a lot of evidence of that. Now, I should preface that by saying, as I said in the book, I don't think Russia's meddling in the election made any difference. Russia's been meddling in American politics since the Soviet Union, going back decades. We meddle in their politics. None of it's been very effective historically. But the clip that you just played from Taibbi, what they were mainly talking about up till December 8th in that line of the emails that Gabbard has been stressing is Russian cyber operations against election infrastructure, which would be things like voting machines and state voting rolls and that sort of stuff. And there was a lot of evidence going back to 2014 that the Russians were conducting reconnaissance and looking for weaknesses in the system. What they focused on after Trump won was a different kind of cyber operation, which was the hacking of the Democratic National Committee and other stuff that the Russians were doing, like this idiotic bot messaging that you saw online. And they didn't make that up after December 9th. If you remember, Dan, the Obama Justice Department and FBI applied for a FISA warrant against Carter Page in October, and they basically wrote the document in September. And their theory in that document is that the Russians were meddling in the 2016 election and they had hacked the DNC. And the question then was whether Trump was working with them or not. They were, they relied on this Steele dossier, which turns out to be completely bogus and was manufactured by the Clinton campaign, to come up with this theory that Trump was colluding with Russia. But the question of whether Russia was doing stuff was not, I don't think that was disputable.
Yeah, but that's right. But that's not the issue. I mean, the issue where this goes off the rails is that last part about the collusion that opened up Pandora's box and allowed all of the malevolent actors in the D.C. press corps and inside the Beltway generally to have a feeding frenzy at the expense of Trump's first 2+ years of his presidency, and arguably at the expense of his presidency. I mean, this is why you have the phrase being bandied about by Gabbard and others, I think appropriately so, purposely subverting the will of the people. And it's funny because I'm old enough to remember when a former president named Trump was criminally charged with engaging in a conspiracy to deprive the American people of their rights, 18 U.S.C. 241, conspired to discount votes and prevent people from voting because he spread false claims about the 2020 election. That was one of those Jack Smith prosecutions. So, knowingly spreading false information for the purposes of subverting the will of the people and the rights of the people, the right to vote, the rights of the principal, in this case, the president, there's nothing that veers into the criminal possibly here?
Well, I'd say a couple of things about that. First, I'm old enough to remember, because it only happened last year, that Trump took a very strong position that presidents have absolute immunity from prosecution for the acts that they take in connection with their presidency. So, I'm a little bit surprised to hear Gabbard say that she's referring Obama for prosecution when Trump's position is that Obama, at least unless Trump has changed his position is that presidents can't be prosecuted for the stuff they do as president.
Well, right.
And
but
you're right that they brought that civil rights case, but we all criticized it because it was a preposterous case. That having been said,
well, I'm not saying the two cases are parallel, though. Yeah, but
I said this morning on television. When they talk about treason, I think that's crazy talk. I don't understand why they haven't talked about conspiracy against civil rights. It doesn't have to be just the civil right of voting, which is, I think, the point that you were about to make. And I would just point out that when John Durham investigated this for 4 years, I looked at this again this morning. He laid out a number of crimes that he looked into, and one of them was the only one I can think of that would fit this situation. Now, you have all kinds of immunity problems and you have all kinds of statute of limitations problems, but at least that civil rights statute addresses people who are acting under the color of law, that's public officials, to subvert people's civil rights. Now, you have to come up with a theory of what the civil right is that was subverted, and that may be why Durham didn't go that route, but at least that's in the ballpark of what we're talking about here.
What about where this started with the first tranche of documents released, the suggestion that there's real legal exposure. I mean, this is not the first time this suggestion has been made, but it's being revisited, and there has to be sort of some popular support for pursuing these cases in order to get them moving again, I suppose. But the idea that Comey and Brennan, at least those two, have potential exposure. There's a circumstantial case to be made that they perjured themselves and maybe conspired with each other to commit perjury.
Yeah, I think the problem that you have with that, when you get away from civil rights conspiracy and you're talking about what Gabbard tried to establish in the first bunch of discovery, was that they had basically made false statements in 2016. And, that's 9 years ago, so the statute of limitations ran on it like 4 years ago. But the hook that she tried to use was Brennan's testimony in 2023 before the House. And the problem that she has with a case like that, and I mean, look, Gabbard's not a lawyer.
Right.
She referred it, this stinks to high heaven, so she referred it to the Justice Department and for them to sort it out, which is fine. But I think what the Justice Department would say is, in 2016, Brennan sent these emails which showed that he was championing the Steele dossier. He was agreeing with Comey that the Steele dossier should go in the intelligence community assessment. What he testified in 2023 was that the CIA institutionally opposed putting the Steele dossier in the intelligence assessment. And the problem is that testimony is true. Now, Brennan may have been trying to conceal his own personal role, but he carefully testified in 2023 that as an institution, the CIA was bitterly opposed to including the intelligence assessment or including in the intelligence assessment the Steele dossier. That's not only true. The paper trail that Gabbard put out shows that Brennan's own deputy and other analysts in the CIA wanted no part of the dossier, but they also succeeded in keeping it out.
Yes.
So, the big problem with this is when Brennan wrote his email in 2016, he was talking about his personal opinion, which was that the dossier should be included. When he testified in 2023, he was talking about the CIA as an institution, and he didn't refer to his own position, and he wasn't confronted with any of his emails.
One of the other arguments advanced is that this conspiracy to commit perjury, this conspiracy to subvert the will of the people persists to this day. So it's an ongoing conspiracy, and thus you can avoid some statute of limitations issues, and you potentially can fold in people like President Obama out of office if there is evidence, I have no idea, if there's evidence that he participated in this ongoing conspiracy to deprive people of their rights.
Yeah, I guess the problem with this is that the idea of subverting the will of the people is a very vague concept, whereas the civil rights statutes require you to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think this is probably Durham's a very good, experienced prosecutor, and I think this may be part of the reason he didn't go down that road. You have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there is a known right that was violated knowingly by people who were acting under the color of law. Subvert the will of the American people is not, in that category. They'd have to tighten that up. And, look, the other problems they have is it's not like this didn't succeed. Now, you don't have to show that a conspiracy was successful in order to prove a conspiracy, but it helps. And in this instance, Trump did win the election, despite all the machinations of these people. He won. And, how much did they subvert the process when Mueller has this 3 or 4 year investigation, whatever it was, which obviously drove Trump crazy while it was underway. But when he finally files the final report, the finding is that there's no collusion between Trump and Russia. So in the end, he was vindicated. That's not to say that his political enemies have done anything other than disgrace themselves. I mean, this was a terrible political dirty trick. They exploited the law enforcement and intelligence apparatus of the government to try to derail a presidency. And, historically, I think this is going to go down as one of the most disgraceful episodes in modern American history. But as Durham said, the fact that people do disgusting political things is not necessarily a criminal offense. To come up with a crime as opposed to something we can all condemn for a bunch of other reasons, you have to have something that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that is within the statute of limitations and is a cognizable crime. And I think that's the problem the Justice Department's going to have.
And let me ask you this. Even something, because it's something we were discussing a bit earlier in the show with listeners, even if President Obama is found to have said at that December 9th meeting or in advance of it, I want you to do a redo of that intelligence assessment, and I want you to say that that Trump or that Putin is colluding with Trump, or Putin is actively aiding and abetting the Trump campaign, or aided and abetted the Trump campaign. He's the reason that Trump won. I want you to say that in the intelligence assessment. I don't care if you think it's true or not. I don't care if it's true or not. I want you to do it. That would not be criminal. He would have presidential immunity in that case.
Well, according to Trump, he would. According to what Trump's theory in the Supreme Court was, if the president takes a position or takes an action that's within the broad ambit of his executive power, then a court can't look into that. Now, he can be impeached over it.
Yeah.
There's a lot. There are other remedies to it. But what that case is about, Dan, is not to say that this kind of behavior is good. What it's about is to say what's the appropriate way to address it. And what the court basically says, now they didn't go as far as Trump, but they went pretty close. What they basically say is this isn't for judges and prosecutors to get into. We're not the check on presidential abuse of power. That's on Capitol Hill. That's not here. This
is what I was trying to communicate. The 3 buckets test. The first being the core constitutional. The second being the where you have absolute immunity, presumptive immunity with powers that are complementary to the core constitutional powers, presumptive immunity,
right.
and then no immunity to non-official acts. Basically say that whatever you not, this is not absolute because this is a framework and there are going to be exceptions, context matters. But what I'm trying to impress upon people is basically what a president does in office, he has immunity for. And so the only way you're going to get a president is to get him as a former president doing something as a private citizen and not as the president, short of, actively organizing a break-in at the Watergate Hotel or actually shooting somebody on Fifth Avenue. Short of that, it has to be things that he does as a private citizen.
Yeah, well, so here's what I just qualify. I push back a little bit on that.
Okay.
And I hate citing the Bragg case because it's such a preposterous case. But let's say that there actually was something criminal about the checks that Trump wrote while he was president for Michael Cohen. I think everybody would agree that when Trump paid Michael Cohen that money after Cohen had laid out the money for the non-disclosure agreement, right? If we pretend that was criminal somehow, because I don't think it was, but if let's just for argument's sake say so, that was a totally private transaction. So even though Trump was president, he wasn't acting as president at the time. He was paying a private debt to Cohen. So I think something like that even though he was president, and even though he may have signed some of those checks in the White House, for all we know, that would still be something I think that a president, even in power, could be indicted for. Now, he couldn't be prosecuted for it while he was in office, and the Justice Department would probably take the position that you couldn't even indict him while he was in office. You'd have to wait until he was out of office. But I think that kind of like completely private conduct, even if the guy was president at the time, you could reach it. But anything that would be within the ambit of his executive authority, that he's an action that he's taking as president, I think is going to be very, very hard to prosecute. And this distinction between, who the hell knows what's the difference between a core responsibility and the outer ambit of executive authority? I mean, we could argue about that, till the end of time.
Right. Well, that's right, because you have the executive overreach because the legislative isn't doing something he wants, and then you have all those dynamics. But the bottom line is, with in this case, Obama doing almost anything under the sun, under the umbrella of acting in the interests of America's national security, which is certainly how he would characterize this whole intelligence assessment thing. I mean, he's untouchable.
Yeah, that's right. And especially not only it's national security against a hostile foreign power that arguably is trying to intervene in American politics. I mean, there's not a court in the world that would go near that.
Andy McCarthy is a former chief assistant U.S. attorney, Southern District of New York, contributing editor at National Review, author of the bestseller Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Maybe worthwhile for everybody to go back and read Ball of Collusion to just have the backstory that we're getting regurgitated, at least in significant measure right now. Andy, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate your time and insights.
Thank you, Dan.
And Andy joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hey, it's Sean Thompson here for Level 10 Coating. You've been hearing the ads on AM 560 for months. Listeners love the product. Shiny new garage floors. And here's the thing. If you grow up in Chicago, you know a garage is